I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar with Tiernan Brady. My name is Alita Brydon, and I work on the digital here at the Australian Republic Movement. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Australian Republic Movement acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So, to give you a quick rundown as to how this event will work, we'll first hear from National Committee member Vic Alhadeff, who has helped facilitate this event. Thank you very much, Vic. And after Vic has had a quick word, we'll hear from Tiernan, who'll take questions when he's finished speaking. So if you'd like to leave a question for Tiernan, pop it in the chat box and we'll try to get to as many as possible. My name is Alita and I'll throw you over to Vic now. Thank you so much, Vic.
Thank you, and a very more welcome to everybody to this very special evening, and a special welcome to Tiernan, who I will formally welcome in a moment. We are very, Tiernan and I shared a panel here in Sydney during the same-sex marriage debate some years ago, and we were so impressed by him that we thought it was a brilliant idea to invite Tiernan to bring some of his expertise to our campaign. So as Alita said, Tiernan will speak for about 20-25 minutes. We will then open to Q&A for about half an hour, and we will finish at 8:30 p.m. sharp. A brief introduction about Tiernan. Tiernan was director of the Equality Campaign, the successful Australian Marriage Equality Campaign, and political director of Yes Equality, the successful Irish Campaign for Marriage Equality. These are the first two countries, Australia and Ireland, to enact marriage equality by public vote. Tiernan is Global Director of Inclusion at Clifford Chance, former Policy Director of Glen, the Irish LGBTQ+ NGO, and the Director of Organisation for the Irish Deputy Prime Minister and Mayor of his hometown of Bundoran in Ireland. He speaks to us today from London. A very warm welcome to Tiernan. Thank you very much. We look forward to hearing from you about your comprehensive campaign experience and perhaps some thoughts and insights about how these might be applied to our campaign for a republic. Over to you.
Thanks, Vic, and thanks for inviting me, to be honest. And it's really nice to be able to talk about this topic. Firstly, before I say anything else, I'm happily, even though I'm in London, I'm happily an Irish citizen and always have been, and we have managed to successfully have some wonderful presidents and never had a bad one yet since 1938, and it has all gone well, and the roof hasn't fallen in. In fact, the exact opposite has happened. But I presume almost everybody on this call already thinks that anyway and knows that about what they would like to see in a republic. I was thinking about a few things, because I mean, obviously being Irish, I could happily talk for hours, and then I thought, no, I'm not allowed to do that. I really have to narrow this down to a couple of points that were hopefully useful, because like every campaign ever is different, and whether that's the referendum on the Republic versus the referendum plebiscite, or whatever name we wanted to call it at the time, on marriage in Australia, but even a campaign on marriage in Australia versus the campaign on marriage in Ireland were all different. So what we're not trying to say is there's a one size fits all to all campaigns, but there are some really, I think, important thoughts to hold in your mind as you think about framing a good campaign. And we thought long and hard about it, to be honest, when we did this in Ireland first, because when Ireland was facing the marriage vote, no country had ever voted yes to marriage. And the idea that Ireland would become the first country was probably a bit crazy in most people's heads. Because as much as, we like to think of ourselves as, the land of Amazon and Facebook and Intel and Microsoft and Apple, we are also the land of Dairy Girls and Father Ted. And like both of those are true, but also it reflected how hard it is to win a referendum on any issue. So we knew going into that we had to think very hard. I think one of the worst things anybody could do, and this principle applies to all referendums, is to go, this will be an easy win. There are no easy referendums. And if you're on the change side of the referendum, you're already at a massive disadvantage. And we don't think that through often enough sometimes, because if you're on the change side, your job is to get everybody who's going to vote on your side 100% over the line. You have to get them there that this will be okay. So they could be 90% in favor and they could be just thinking about another bit. You have to get them up to 100. And the challenge is always the other side has a significantly easier campaign because they don't have to persuade anybody that they're right. They just have to persuade people that I have a little doubt about this question. And so instantly we knew going into the Irish campaign, we're already up against it. And in that, A, this is a change campaign. B, which is different from the Australian Republic campaign. This is a campaign specifically about minorities, and you're trying to get the majority of the population to vote for them. We weren't trying to get the majority of the population to become gay. We were just hoping they'd let us get married, which is a very different campaign. But that knowing that was what came up ahead of us, we've done a lot of thinking. And we tried to think about, well, what are the barriers that change campaigns come up against all the time? And we looked at an awful lot of campaigns where we had got it right and we got it wrong in multiple countries. But there were a few key things really emerged. And when I went to Australia, I found for the marriage campaign, these principles, we applied them as well, because they did make sense. And I think they should be useful to people for any referendum campaign when you're on the change side. So I'm going to try and give them in a couple of point forms that is hopefully useful rather than a big long chat. One was, we realized that campaigns that are referendums happen in every corner of your country. So, and what I mean by that is, a political campaign tends to happen on TV and the radio. Maybe someone knocks your door, and that's fine. A referendum is a gigantic moment in any country's history, and that campaign happens at every single kitchen table in Australia. Everybody at some point will have a conversation about this with somebody they already know well, and somebody they trust, and someone they feel a connection with. The conversations they're going to have about the Republic aren't going to be with their opponents. They're not going to be on TV or Twitter. The hard campaigners will be on TV and Twitter, but they're going to be having those conversations. And one of the things we learned really early was because people looked at political campaigns and went, oh my, this all looks really angry, then they weren't prepared to have that conversation at all. And now, bear with me on this. This is a problem if you're on the change side, because our job, once again, is to persuade people right up to the water's edge and then into it. If people aren't having those conversations because they think the tone or they think the environment is just too angry, then the space where we need to persuade them and hold them even for that last moment of keeping them at 100% disappears. And I can tell you, and I'm sure everyone on this call would recognize this too, campaign tone, even between the Irish campaign and the Australian marriage campaign, and certainly since that, has become an angrier space. And if you're on the change side of the argument, you're in trouble there. Because what we have to do is constantly build a campaign that is creating the spaces where people are going to be able to talk to their granny, or to their uncle, or to their work colleague. Because that's the real conversations that are going to happen that will decide where people go in the vote. And the no side can actually live without those spaces. Because the no side just has to shut it all down, because now there's no space for conversation, persuasion, and engagement. And we realized people didn't want to talk about it because they just didn't think having the argument and having this gigantic blow up at a kitchen table or with a work colleague was worth it. So one of the first things we had to do was try and go, how do we unwrap that? Because this is a huge barrier in a world where social media and national media, unfortunately, amplify the angrier side. And you got to think of it this way, because everyone instantly blames social media, but mainstream media does it as well. Because a fight is more entertaining than a conversation. If you're on Q&A and you look at what Q&A put out on Twitter the following day, it's never the 30 seconds of, well, that was a very interesting point. I think we should talk some more about that. Oh, we think we have common ground here. It's when they throw things at each other. So mainstream is perfectly good at blaming social media, but they're just as guilty of it. where we're creating this space that is angry. And they do that for several reasons. They know that, they're up against my kitchen rules and they need to keep people on, and that fireworks is probably more interesting. So again, back to where change will happen in your referendum campaign, it will very rarely happen on the media, because the people who are looking for that conversation, they're not getting it on the media, they're getting fireworks on the media. So they're getting lots of sound and fury, but no light. So the campaign really has to own its responsibility for going, actually, we can't expect someone else to create the space where our conversations are going to happen. We have to create that space. And that made us think about, well, okay, well, what are the other fears? One was the fear of people didn't want to be in an argument with someone close. People didn't want to have it, fall out with people, be disrespectful to people. And for LGBT, like obviously one of the barriers specifically on this one was obviously, terminology, and people didn't want to ask, I'd love to ask Auntie Mary what it's like to be a lesbian, but I can't be doing that now over lunch because I'm not sure if Auntie Mary is a lesbian. I think she might be Q or P. I forget which letter she said she was, but I'm not falling out over dinner on this one. So I'm not going to ask. And every time I look in the media, it looks really angry out there. So I'm not going to ask my aunt. And as a result, then people don't. The terminologies obviously hopefully don't apply for the Republic, but the fear of getting it wrong and having a fight in your family does, or having an argument with someone you work with or a colleague. So I think one of the big things that a campaign gets to do is understand we won't be in every kitchen. We're not able to walk into that kitchen and just physically make the space ourselves and tell everyone, oh, it's all going to be great, let's have a conversation. What we can do is run a national campaign that knows that that is one of our key jobs, to create a discipline of tone that allows people to talk to each other. And I think people sometimes miss that in referendums, that actually one of the most powerful things you can do is set the tone before you even say anything. What's the tone that's constantly coming from the campaign? Because you'll have supporters all over Australia, and they will take your cue as the leaders of that campaign. And then if they look up and go, that's really angry, okay, now I have a choice. One, that's what I'm supposed to be, obviously, so I'm going to be really angry. Or two, I don't want to be really angry, so I'm not going to campaign for this. I'm going to sit it out. So as innocent as this sounds, I actually think it's also incredibly challenging. How do you create a constant tone and have a real thought about that? What does that look like? Because if you're on the change side of the argument, you are the ambassador for the future constantly. What you look like, what you sound like, how you engage with people, that is subconsciously seen as what the future you're promising is. So if you're running around going, the future's going to be awesome, but you're doing with a stick while screaming at people, they're absorbing the sound of you and the approach and the tone of you rather than what you're saying. And we know this is true anyway, because we've been, most of what people absorb isn't necessarily what you say at all. And this is really disappointing for campaigners, because our campaigners, when we think something's really important, we think everybody's hanging on my every word. I gave an interview on the radio the other day. It was just inspired. I'm pretty sure it's heading for the history books. And instead of it's just heading for history. And two very different journeys. And it misses the point that most people who were listening to that radio were also thinking about their jobs and their kids and mowing the lawn, and half of them were in traffic and they were just thinking about the person in front of them, and hopefully in a happy way, but sometimes not. But they're balancing 100 things while you're talking, and they absorb, back to the tone point, they're more likely to absorb your tone than they are your content. And you could test this for any of you that ever does a radio interview, if you ever have a chance to. And Australia has loads and loads and loads of radio stations, so you'll all get a chance to in a big campaign. But afterwards, if you're lucky enough to still have a mom, phone your mom and go, well, what did you think? And of course, being your mother, should tell you she was fabulous. I think it was just great, it was brilliant. And then ask her, what did they say? And she won't remember it. And that's somebody who's totally committed to you, and they want you to do well. And it's always very startling to people that people haven't picked that up, that, oh, no, were people not listening to everything? But they were listening. But it's not just the content they're lifting. What they were lifting was, they sound nice. They sound interested and committed. They sound like a future I'd like to be part of. And it can be all too tempting for us to just think, no, actually, well, what I really want to do is go on the radio and do the Q&A fireworks. You know, and you come off the radio going, yeah, I was up against the opponent. I absolutely leveled them. It was frying pans at dawn, wiped out. And you come off and you get loads of text messages from people going, you were awesome. And the problem is every one of those text messages from someone who's already voting yes. And you think you've just connected with Australia, but what you've done is connected with your hardcore base. And they're already on board. They're the last people you need to constantly be focusing on in the campaign. And in a way, I suppose that becomes that second piece. So if our tone is critical, our focus on who we're trying to talk to is critical, no matter what. And I think campaigns can fall into this trap all the time of constantly talking to the hardcore of your own side. So every campaign has, here's your hardcore yes, here's your hardcore no, and then the vast majority of people on any issue are sitting in the middle, and as you would see in polls in Australia, favorably disposed to a Republic, but favorably disposed. Easy to pick off though. And that's your group that you're constantly trying to get over the line and take care of. And campaigns, sometimes we can get totally obsessed with going, are we still carrying our own coalition? Are we bringing them all with us? And spend so much time talking internally and chasing the wrong voices and tones, because we think the more important thing is to have this absolute unified control over our side. And again, I think it's a huge challenge for us about making sure we understand as a campaign that we are a voluntary campaign. No one has to listen to us. There is no official yes side. And even if the government picks an official yes side, it still doesn't mean you can tell someone else who's voting yes to stop going on the radio. So you're not in charge of every voice. And that means you're not in charge of all the tones, but campaigns can fixate a lot on how do I become in charge of every voice on my side? And how do and that leads them to play to their own side too much. And when in fact, what you really have to think about is, I'm constantly talking to the middle. My strength as a campaign comes from talking to the middle, talking to those who we absolutely have to get on board, rather than the other way around, where we're constantly talking to the base and the middle doesn't hear us at all. And whilst we're doing that, the no side is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is picking off the middle, not necessarily by persuading them that, you know, a monarchy is a good idea, but just persuading them that you're not there yet. You know, there's a little doubt here about this one. So I would also say tone, focusing on the middle constantly, and understanding you don't get to be the only voice in the campaign. But back to the point of actually having discipline of tone becomes even more important then, because that's the constancy you're creating whilst 25 million people have a conversation, which is precisely where you want them to be. I thought one or two other things that might be useful. I thought the 3 animals of campaigning. So never eat a red herring, never run down a rabbit hole, and never mud wrestle with a pig, because the pig gets muddy and loves it, and you just get muddy. And
could you, sorry, Tiernan, could you unpack those 3, please?
Yes. So the job of red herrings and rabbit holes. Again, the no side doesn't have to persuade the other side. The no side has to do a couple of things. They have to get you off your message. Whatever you've decided your message is, and your tone, and creating all the space, and you can have the beautiful, fantastic campaign in the world ready to roll. And then the no side's job is to go, actually, we can't win on this topic, so let's make it about other topics. Let's make it about something else. I'll give you an example of this from the marriage campaign. So when we done the marriage campaign in Australia, the no side's first TV ad was about a mother who was worried that her boy was wearing a dress at school. Nothing to do with marriage. Nothing at all to do with marriage. But they had looked at American campaigns where the no side had ran strong campaigns talking about this is actually all about schools. You know, no, it's just about two people who are getting married. But they need to broaden out the topic. So let's make it about dresses, and let's make it about bathrooms, and let's make it about. So the Republic becomes, let's make it about politicians, let's make it about, but what about governor generals, and what about this structure, and what about that? And it's a very clever tactic because it has a purpose. Its purpose is to get you off your main topic and have you run down rabbit holes and eat red herrings. And every day that you're doing that, you're playing the other side's game. And it can be really tempting because a lot of it, if they're really clever as a campaign, is designed to provoke and pull you out. They want to get you out in talking about this extraneous issue. So we had an issue around trans divorce came up in the marriage campaign. And again, of course, this was an issue that would be addressed by marriage, but they knew that the opposition knew that trans people were much less visible than lesbian and gay people. So let's make it about that. Another bit of what's all this about? Let's create some extra noise and extra distraction and whataboutery. And so the temptation was we had people who were really angry when they tried to talk about that. They were really angry when they tried to talk about bathrooms and schools because they were being provoked. And it took a discipline of tone for us to be constantly talking to our own people about, no, this isn't where we want to be on this. This is designed to talk about something else. We're talking about this one issue, whether Australia should be a republic, whether LGBT people should be allowed to get married. So the first two animals are all about minding the other side's job, which is to get you to talk about other things when they think they can't win the argument. And I would think your polling reflects that that's exactly what will happen in a campaign on the referendum. They will know that there's a good percentage of settled will, so they have to pick them off. So they'll make it about something else. Here's the red herrings. And once they've done the red herrings, they hope that you run after them, so you run down the rabbit hole. And if they're really lucky, you get really angry, which means you go mud wrestling with them. So now you're mud wrestling with a pig, and pig loves it, and you're getting muddy. I'm not directly referring to the people who are against your campaign as pigs, for the record. But the whole, it's a metaphor, I swear. But you're mud wrestling with the pig, now you're muddy, and now we're back to the original challenge that we knew for all campaigns, tone. And the tone has gone out the window. And at the same time as you're mud wrestling, you'll have some people on your own side cheering you on, going, yeah, go for it. And you've lost all control of your tone. You're now in a space where the other side are laughing because, again, they don't mind that tone because now tomorrow looks scary. And once tomorrow looks scary, people will never vote for change. So you have to convince them. I think one or two other pieces around this. Convince is an important word as we go past the three animals. Go into the next, my next thought that hopefully is useful. I think there's convince, and then there's command, and then there's condemn. And good campaigns should stay focused on the first one all the time. And when the wheels come off a campaign, you'll notice it all the time, they move towards command and condemn. Or they get their messages wrong for the wrong reason. So you have to vote yes. Perfect example. You must vote yes. And why? I don't know. When in fact, persuasion is the more interesting one. And when we were doing the Irish referendum, long before the Australian referendum as well, I've done a lot of work looking at referendums where they had won and they'd lost. And what you see very clearly is a pattern that emerges very like as clear as day. Most campaigns on the change side start polling high and then work their way down throughout the campaign, as the no side does what it's supposed to do, which is chip away and create doubt and pull off potential supporters all the time. So they start at 65 and they finish at 45. And they can't work out why they lost because they were polling. We had 2/3 like 2 months ago. What happened? And we know this. We've been down this road. So we know what this feeling is like. And I've seen it in so many referendums. What What we found though, and one of the ones I looked at particularly was the Scottish independence referendum, which didn't win, but it was remarkable in that the change side went up during the campaign. And it was pretty much the only referendum I could find where those in favor of change managed to get their vote to increase throughout the campaign. So you're going, okay, well, this is worth looking at. What have they done right? And one of the things that they got right, and this is in a way a reflection of tone and creating space, was it was predicted to be a really ugly campaign, as was the marriage campaign, predicted to be a really ugly campaign. And they had to work extra hard to prove that that wasn't the case, because they were already starting from a position where people had a presumption it was going to be noisy and angry. So people had already backed out of the campaign and backed out of getting involved in the conversation. So they really doubled down on it. And I was watching BBC Scotland, I'm a tragic political nerd, and the campaign was on, and it went live to a place called Inverness. Now, I don't know how many people here know Inverness, but there was a woman standing on the street and she was wearing a t-shirt, and God love her. Now, I don't know why you'd be wearing a t-shirt in Inverness for, you'd be frozen like, but she had a sign on her neck that she had made herself with cardboard, and it just said, "I'm voting yes, ask me why." And I remember thinking about it going, that's just so simple and inspired. It understands the need to create space. It positions yourself as a friendly voice. It's not commanding, you must vote yes. It's not even saying, it's even at the earlier stage of saying why you should vote yes. It's almost, come on in and let me talk to you. I would like to talk to you about this. So we took that and literally turned it into an I'm voting yes campaign. Asked me why. I don't know who the woman was. She wasn't like, she was just an activist, community worker. And I've never got to say thanks because I don't know who she is, and hopefully she doesn't sue me for trademark at some point. But anyway, we ran this round that we ran this round Ireland, and we ran a similar version of town halls around an awful lot of rural Australia. But all the time, because you're winning the battle straight away, because we were framing the invitation. We understood that this was persuasion, not command and control. And I think you can feel sometimes when you're on the change side of an argument, it's all too easy because you believe in it and you know it's right to accidentally slip into lecturing. And lecturing is where we really lose people, where we move away from I'm voting yes, ask me why, or our wonderful one that we did with grannies, ring your granny, or ring your relo. We did it in Australia, to show that we could create these spaces all the time. But when we move away from that into, well, you must vote yes, because you'd be really backward if you don't. And we have a tendency to love saying that. There's people on this on the same side of on both sides of every argument. There are people who really just want to beat the other side. They want them to know that I think they're ignorant. They're not. They should be nowhere near your microphones. And every campaign on every issue has them. And they think it's like a family at Christmas. Everyone has a crazy Uncle Joe. Everyone has. And everyone knows he comes in at Christmas, you go, oh God, here's Joe. And Joe just wants to fight and carp and, provoke Auntie Margaret because he knows Margaret's buttons. So he presses Margaret's buttons the whole way through dinner. Campaigns are exactly like that. And campaigns have these people on our own side who are just coming in for Christmas dinner going, I'm going to press these buttons now. Oh, I know just what we're going to do. And one of the favorite buttons always is, you are backward if you don't back me. And it drives people nuts. And when I went down to Australia, I remember thinking, there was people, campaigners and hardcore campaigners. And it comes from a great place because they so fervently believe in it. They bypass the persuasion part, the conversation part, and go straight to command. And go straight, you must do this. This is so important. You must. If you don't do that, we're behind New Zealand. And I kept getting that about marriage going, because obviously New Zealand had got marriage equality. And I kept hearing from our own actors going, oh, this is terrible. We're so backward. You're going, no, you're not. Australia's not backward. It's fabulous. Stop telling people that you think they're terrible. It's not the best way in the world to start a conversation about, by the way, now that you know I think you're terrible, I also have an idea about the future. Do you want to come along? And the campaigns were great at it because we would command and shame. And we spent years explaining to people why they were homophobic. Let me just explain to you what a terrible bigot you are. And there's nobody in the world who was going, well, thank you for telling me how terrible a bigot I am. I shall now support you for the rest of my life. I can't wait. Sign me up. And we do it all the time in campaigns. We can't wait to explain to someone they're backward. And we have to stop because we've missed the persuasion and gone straight to command and condemn, or instruct and condemn. You've heard all these tones before and going, oh, we're so unsophisticated. In fairness, and I'm just saying this for anybody who might be from New Zealand in this call, New Zealand got marriage before Australia because it came out of a raffle. And most people forget that. Most people think, oh my God, Australia, New Zealand was being very, very sophisticated and miles ahead of us. But actually in Parliament, they have a raffle up for backbenchers. And, all the different bills people want come out of a hat. Marriage came out of a hat. So they literally won a lottery ticket. So, but we love beating ourselves up and we shouldn't. Explaining to people why they're the problem is not the beginning of making them the solution. And as a campaign, we just sometimes can't help ourselves, and it misses this 2 points that I will leave before I shut up. 2 very important points when it comes to a referendum. One is you're not there to beat the other side, you're there to win, and they're very different campaigns. A political campaign is one where you're trying to beat the other side. That's okay because, political campaigns are more argy-bargy and more frying pans at dawn. And we put up with that as a society because we know we're going to have another election in 3 years. So you get another swing at the bat. So, and this is an important one. So the framing of a political campaign is there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And therefore beating the other side is a very important way of considering it, because, if you had an election and everybody won and everyone was in government, that would be a very strange election. And people would question what the election was for. For a referendum, you're not trying to beat the other side, you're trying to win. And I know that might sound nuanced, but I think it's a very important one because everybody who votes no is still going to be Australian the next day. They're not leaving the country. Now they're living in a brand new country and your conversation with them continues the next day. Whereas Labour don't have to talk to the coalition the day after an election. So it's the exact opposite because they need a winner and a loser. We need to be able to create space where conversation happens. And I think that piece of we're not there to beat anyone, we're there to win is a really important piece that we never lose sight of, because the whole point is this is about a republic that's for everyone in Australia. And everything we do should reflect that. Every sound we make should reflect that. So I know I told you I easily go for blah, 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 blah. And I know I'm sorry, I know you gotta get murdered more half an hour. So I think thinking about the power of tone, the power of creating space, the power of the challenge of empowering your people to have conversations, but also understanding your focus is on the middle, and then minding the idea that the other side has the easier campaign. It just has, but you got the better arguments, and therefore create the space where those arguments can be heard. I got 30 minutes, sorry.
That was outstanding. Alita, you're managing the questions. Do we have 5,000 questions for Tiernan?
Yeah, we've got a few here. I think one of them really goes into what you were saying about tone and, avoiding, internet biffos or, arguments at the Christmas lunch and all of that kind of thing. So the question's from Michelle, and it says, in 1999, the Republic referendum failed. I think it was not because people didn't think we should have an Australian head of state, but rather because there was so much disagreement over the model of electing or appointing a head of state. How can we avoid that happening again?
I actually think this is a very important question. It's very connected to marriage. And again, everyone will have their own opinions on this, and I have my own distinct one. You want your referendum to be about the smallest possible question. And I don't mean that this is an irrelevancy. I mean the opposite. I mean, if the question is about 100 different things, there's 99 places for the no side to create doubt. So you want to narrow this down that it's very clear on one principle. Marriage, and I think the Republic and marriage do have this in common. When we were doing the marriage campaign in Ireland, and again, in the context of no country ever having done it before, we sat back and went, oh, hold on a minute. We don't want this. If this campaign becomes about pension rights and property rights and employment rights and children's rights and school rights, we're toast, because there's just too many reasons for people to vote no. And it doesn't mean we'll lose any of those arguments. We could almost win all of those arguments, but if you're losing 2% off each one of those topics, you're over. You started at 65 and now you're 49. So narrowing it down is really, really important. So tactically, what we did was, and this was controversial even in our own side, we supported civil partnership, civil union legislation. And, people said that didn't go far enough. You're going, yeah, it doesn't go far enough, but it's getting the legal principles off the table. We got employment law done. We got adoption law done. So that when we were going to the marriage referendum, what we were technically asking people to do was just change a word, because you already were reassured about what this would look like. I think this is one of the challenges exactly in the Republic, and again, tactically, you'll have to do some serious thinking on this, is a referendum is one of those rare moments where people get to do something which is directly have an opinion on a topic. In a general election, you vote on a party which has 100 topics, at least, or 1,000 policies. This is one of your moments where you get to speak specifically on this one thing. If it starts to look confusing, if it starts to look unclear what it is people are being asked, you're going to start peeling off votes. So there has to be absolute clarity. And it struck me that, again, and people in the meetings, they would know this better. It struck me that exactly the point the questioner is making, which is, that clarity wasn't there, and it allowed the no side to go, oh yeah, this is the thing. You need to be worried about this, because I thought there was another piece somewhere within this as well, which, if you look, there's another public vote coming up in Australia first too, and in Australia too, and there's soon, and they're going to have the same challenge about, well, what's the legislation? And you can already hear that early. People go, what's the legislation? What's the legislation? Why can't I see the legislation? And I know, I understand there's a report now, but now you have to be sure that conversation is going in the wrong direction, and a referendum needs to pull it back. Because if we're into, you're not sure what you're voting for, you're just unnecessarily losing votes straight away. And again, it's a fascinating question about our president in Ireland is directly elected. And we have been, this is me being a Republican now, which is probably appropriate. We've been so lucky, because people have always taken that vote seriously. In a way, voting for the president every 7 years is almost like a referendum every 7 years about who we are. And so, our current one is a former politician who's a poet. And before that was constitutional lawyer Mary McAleese, another constitutional lawyer Mary Robinson. We've had this run of brilliant choices because people take the choice seriously. Depending on whether this becomes a public vote or whether it becomes directly elected, or whether it is elected by politicians. And again, I have not lived in a country that has one that has been elected by politicians, so it would be unfair of me to say whether it's good or bad, but I presume that's one of the choices. But I think narrowing it down and making sure your constant clarity is really important, because it is the other side's job just to blow smoke into the public debate the whole way through this. And now nobody can see it. And if you can't see it, you're asking people to jump into the dark. And that's a hard ask on a referendum. And this shouldn't be that. You're not jumping into the dark. Half the countries in the world, 80% of the countries in the world are republics. We know what we're doing. And so there's so many good examples.
I've got another question for you, if you're happy with that. Given your advice about not going down rabbit holes, how should a campaign respond to misinformation pushed by the other side by unfriendly media? At what point should the campaign rebut the misinformation?
So I think there's a couple of issues to answer around that. It depends on the frame. So there's, first of all, there's a question around Australia's framework of a referendum. This is going to be a little nerdy, bear with me. At the moment, Australia lacks a referendum framework. Whereas in Ireland, for example, and in most other countries in America, places where public ballot initiatives happen all the time, you have frameworks around the fairness of those and making sure that what's out there is true. And so we have the referendum commission is chaired by a high court judge. They monitor the debate and they do intervene sometimes if they see absolute falsehoods being told by campaigns. And in the world of social media, we can see that all the time. I mean, we've had multiple referendums on different issues where the campaign has been, I mean, the Brexit campaign was like notoriously dishonest. And we can see, though, that there was no mechanism for intervention. And at the moment, Australia won't have a mechanism for intervention. So there will be a question for the campaign about how it does that. I'll be honest, one of the things we did a lot was every time we felt we had to rebut directly, we also explained to people very clearly why we thought they were saying this. So we called out their strategy. So we were talking about, well, that's not true. But first of all, here's why you're being told that. You're not being told that because it's important. You're being told that because they know they've lost the argument. And now they're trying to tell you it's about a different argument. And so we went straight for the tactics rather than run down the rabbit hole, if that makes sense. And that addresses an awful lot of what you need to do in that space. That you're calling them out for what they're actually doing, which is creating rabbit holes and red herrings, but also not trying your best not to fall into the trap of, now I'm actually talking about this a lot, the rabbit hole they've dug. Whereas in fact, what you can do, and we tried to do a lot of, was point out it's a rabbit hole. Here's why they dug the rabbit hole.
Tiernan, if I can jump in there, a rabbit hole which we're encountering more and more is people saying the last president we saw elected, his name was Trump, and we don't want another Trump. And that sounds to me like a classic rabbit hole.
Well, I mean, I suppose more recent one is Joe Biden, and so that's the first answer to that. That's an executive president in America, and I think Australia, if they're going to draw up a list all the time of, oh look, the Americans made a choice I didn't like, and the French ones did too, and then they made 6 I did like, and well, the whole point is it is our choice. We have no choice over Charles at all. And, if Charles turned out to be Trump, what could we do about it? Nothing. And not alone will we not have him for 4 years, we'd have him for 40. So I think you could dismantle that one, I think, reasonably well. I'd have to think about how I'd respond, but I'd be heading somewhere in that direction, going, but the great thing about being a president, we get to remove them. And that's the whole ball game. We're not stuck with the greatest of respect to the late Queen Elizabeth. She was there like for 71 years or 76 years. It's like, and what happens if you get someone you don't like for that? Like, that's a lot, or someone who's totally misaligned with Australian values, which, funnily enough, someone who lives on the other side of the planet might be. It's not unreasonable to presume they might have different set of values living in cold, damp island than living in, a gigantic continent that runs from the tropics to the Antarctic. And so I think that's a red herring you could have fun with, to be honest. And also, I think it also reflects, the question also does something else, which puts you in a good position. It reflects the fact that the people who say that don't trust people. Because I have great faith in people and they make great decisions mostly. We've never had a president in Ireland that we have not been proud of. And no president has ever been elected by more than 56% of the vote. But we've always bought into them and they've always been great. And I would imagine the kind of presidency we're looking at in Australia is also much more comparable to Ireland, because it is not an executive. It's not a prime minister role in the same way that Donald Trump would be an American president, or to a degree the French president would be. It is it's replacing Governor General status with a figurehead to the nation. And so I think there's always something in there about do we trust people? And there's a weird argument underneath the Trump one of going, yeah, but I trust Australians. They won't make that call. You know, that's the whole point. Again, back to making sure the other side can be quite good at it, and we can be quite good at it, explaining to people why they're all terrible. And you're going, no, we're not. Australians have got this. They'll make great choices.
So you've talked about the manner in which, and this is a question, by the way, you've talked about the manner in which a positive tone helped win the day for marriage equality. Given it's fair to say a republic is a less, as I've described it, emotionally exciting issue, how do we create excitement about an Australian republic in the electorate?
I mean, it's the right question to ask, first of all. I mean, how do your campaign needs momentum and energy. I mean, I could give you a very long answer off the top of my head, but it's start to agree, but it does need momentum and energy. And I mean, I think probably one of the better examples of that was the New Zealand flag, which went through all the processes and then lost because the campaign was just dull. Don't be a dull campaign. It's really important that you look like the future. And the future is energetic and Australian, and everything about your campaign is reflects what you're telling people they will feel like if they support you, and what tomorrow will feel like. You are ambassadors for the future, not just in what you say, but in what you do. And for the campaign, that energy is a very important reflection of that. I mean, there's lots you could do to create, you create that visibility and create that energy. And it's also really important that you do it because you're creating great spaces for your own side to celebrate and learn from each other and know that they're not on their own, because you want them to go home and have those conversations in the workplace. And this is, in fairness, my answer is quite more generalist than specific for a reason. I think we'd have to take a look at where we are and what would that be. But keeping an eye that campaigns are showbiz. They are. And I know that might sound really vacuous, but also it is, because people are absorbing the campaign whilst they get on with their life. And so you want to be the show that they're absorbing, going, tapping their foot to, and they don't realize they're tapping their foot to it. And that's what a great campaign does, is that, understands that you're a constant hum that's being absorbed. And that needs to be something people going, yeah, I really like the feel of that. So it's an interesting question always that might sound weird. What does your campaign feel like? And what is that energy? And especially because you're selling the future, you have to really think about that. Well, how does that manifest itself? So, and again, there's no one answer on this. There's some really interesting answers, and this is why I'm trying to not be too specific. But if we look at some examples, we done a dog walking event in the Irish marriage campaign. Like, honestly, when it was proposed, I was just going, now, come here, where are we going? What's going on here? It was one of the most popular events we had. Every news channel covered it, because who doesn't love a dog? And I was sitting there going, okay, yeah, do you know what? I wouldn't have seen that coming. But it was about creating a campaign where people knew the tone, knew that they were trying to create space for conversation and visibility and energy, and then went and did it. And they did it in ways that you couldn't control, because you're not going to be in Ballarat, and you're not going to be in Wodonga, and you're not going to be in Toowoomba every day as a centralized campaign. But you created a tone space for going, actually, I think we'll do a picnic. We'll do a picnic in the town, in the park. And which you get to do in the Irish campaign didn't get to do, in fairness, for multiple, temporal reasons. Or not temporal, that's time-wise, my weather reasons. But honestly, when I think about the dog walking, we done an equality thing, which was TEA, obviously, because Irish people would drink tea right up until it comes out of their ears. But I don't know if people remember Father Ted. I don't know if anyone's ever watched Father Ted, the comedy. You should. Anyway, there was a woman in it called Mrs. Doyle, who was the priest's housewife, and all she did was push tea at people. You will, you'll take a cup, you will. So we got her to launch tea mornings. And again, so tea mornings, all these events that reflected the positive energy you were trying to build up, places where people could talk, visibility that looked like, oh, I'd like to be in that gang, dog walking pieces. And so, and some of that might sound really frivolous. And some of it sounded really frivolous to me, and some of the campaigns were going, no. But the great thing about a great campaign is it's going to set people free in their town, So your campaign, because you're not going to be able to micro control that, and you don't want to. But once you've created the tone, the energy, the noise, then people go, I really want to have that. I'm off to Aubrey Wodonga to have a breakfast on the lawn, and we're going to do this breakfast thing on a Sunday, or we're going to do a brunch, or we're going to do a dog walkers, or we're going to do kite flyers. But that will only happen when you run a campaign that A, creates space, B, creates positive energy, and C, clearly sends that message to your supporters everywhere that you're the masters of this in your town. You're the people that are where we depend on, and you know your town better than I know your town. I mean, I'm Irish, and I directed the marriage campaign in Australia. The idea that I know, Wodonga or anywhere better than someone from Wodonga is fanciful. The idea that someone from Potts Point understands Wollongong is nonsense. And so you need to build a campaign that's, and this is the answer that's taking me somewhere that's actually, sorry, bear with me. You need to, because it was something such an important one. You need a campaign that empowers people, and where your campaign is clearly making people feel like you trust them, that you know your space. We give you all the energy you want and all the right tone, and we'll create the space, but you do Wollongong. You know what you're at there. And let us know, and we'll help in any way we can. Again, I think political campaigns do the opposite of this. Political campaigns have to control the message, and that's perfectly understandable, because one slip-off message, and the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald are going to write about it. Oh, it's all falling apart, the campaign, there's no discipline. A referendum campaign is the opposite. A referendum campaign has to set people free to run that in their own space. And so again, and sometimes as campaigners, we really like to control stuff. We go, oh no, I have the only message. Like if I had to just hold my knuckles to the table to try and go, that dog walking thing is crazy, don't do it. And I was totally wrong. I was brilliant. It was brilliant. I was totally wrong. The people in that village knew exactly what that village needed. And that freedom is a very important principle, empowerment of your teams.
Can I ask on that concept? I heard you mention the phrase earlier, selling the future, which I absolutely loved. But I think, like you're saying, you need to be really empowered to sell the future, right? So how do you empower people to talk about an issue and kind of overcome that fear of getting it wrong? Because especially with the Republic campaign, like there's a lot going on there. But how do you give them that confidence to talk about it in their community?
I mean, I think there's two things. One is that back to the point we were saying earlier from one of the questions, keep it tight. Keep it tight and keep it simple, your core message. As a national campaign, that's one thing you want to do. You want to have one very clear core sentence. And I'll give two examples of this. Because we're so close to the issue, we think everybody's hanging off our every word. And they're not. They're really not. They're getting on with their lives. And they'll spend some time thinking about the Republic, but it won't be as much time as you think, and it won't be, or the same as marriage. People will have a conversation that might only be 10 minutes at a dinner table, and that's it, done. Decisions baked in. So, Australia, because of its scale, has so many different radio stations and TV stations, and we would have a lot of people who we used to send to talk and do the interviews and the morning chat shows and whatever. And we were really disciplined about stick this message, and they would come back after we need to change the message, we need to up the message, we need to change our game. And you're going, no you don't, no you actually definitely don't, because it's only when you are so blue in the face that you want to get sick from saying the same thing 100,000 times that somebody in Wagga has picked it up. So a simple, clear message and a refrain is one part of that, very important, that that allows people to be able to pick that up themselves. And it's important to think through what that is. You want to do some research on this, because again, with true believers, which we all are, we can be the worst explainers because we're true believers. And therefore we don't interrogate it in the way someone who's changed their mind has. So I'll give you an example. We were about to launch the marriage campaign in Ireland, And we had the hotel done and the stall and the speakers and the media and the balloons and the Howie, and it was going to be just awesome. It was all the best thing ever. And we were sitting at a table on the Saturday before the launch on the Monday, and Seamus Dooley, who was a journalist but was on the board, turned to us and said, right, sounds great. Can someone explain to me why you're voting yes in 30 seconds? And none of us were able to. We were all able to have a dinner party and explain it. You go, here's another 45 minutes. Oh, and here's another really interesting angle. You're going, oh my God. And you suddenly realize most people, the amount of time you have to talk to them is the amount of time you have in a lift with them. And if you can't convey your message like that, then two things happen. One, the person you're listening to just goes, oh God, I'm losing the will to live here. And they stop listening. But it also means that all the people you need to have those conversations don't have that sentence. And now you're leaving them on their own. So you want to have some deep thought about what's that one message that is clear, deliverable, that anybody can pick up. And it can't be 2 paragraphs. Because what people then will be able to do is personalize that themselves. And because again, you can't control what they're going to say at the kitchen table. So but you want them to feel like they should say it, and you need to give them a clear, tight, a tight message that they can then take and apply to their own lives. So simplicity of message is really important.
Tiernan, we have time for one quick question and one quick answer, because I'm very mindful of respect for everyone's time, that we end in 4 minutes time. Do we have one quick question, Alita, that Tiernan can give us a quick answer to?
Yes, I've got one here. What about the role of empathizing with your opponents? A good way to start a conversation, no? What do you reckon on that one?
Yes, absolutely. Look, this guided the entire campaign that I was involved in both countries. Today's opponent is tomorrow's advocate on every change argument in the world. Never lose sight of that the person you're talking to right now, and you could be 2 years away or 3 years away or 5 years away from a referendum. If you can get them over the line, not only do you get them over the line, they could become monstrous advocates. And we already know that's true, because polling for the Republic wasn't where it is 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whichever. Polling for marriage equality, if we'd asked the majority of people who voted yes for marriage in Australia, if I'd asked them the question 15 years earlier, would have voted no. Same people. They didn't leave. We didn't throw them out and ask really sophisticated people from Sweden to move into Australia. It was the same Australians. So the question is the perfect question. Never lose sight of the fact that a great campaign is constantly fixated on today's opponent is tomorrow's advocate. And it's our job to make that journey enjoyable and something that they want to do. There's a great unofficial Irish proverb. Irish diplomacy is the ability to tell a man to go to hell in a way that he looks forward to the trip. And you need to frame it, and you're doing the opposite. You're sending them to somewhere that's the opposite of hell. It will be fabulous, but you need to build a pathway for them. And it's a brilliant way of, for the person who asked that question, that's the way of thinking all the time. You're totally right. Do that and we'll win.
Tiernan, it falls to me to bring this meeting to a close. Without any fear of hyperbole, this has been brilliant. It has been invaluable. It has been priceless. And on behalf of the approximately 200 people who have registered for tonight, I cannot thank you enough for your insights, for the unique perspectives which you bring to the issue. And when this campaign eventually gets over the line, your presentation tonight will be acknowledged as a pivotal moment in helping get the campaign in the direction which it is. So to all the supporters and those interested on this call tonight, my name is Alhadeff. I'm a member of the National Committee of the Republic Movement, and I bring greetings from Craig Foster, our newly elected chair. And I urge all of you to take Tiernan's message on board. We are at a cusp in this nation's history right now. We have a referendum coming up on the voice. And if the Labour government wins power, it is committed to a referendum in the next term. But for that to happen, we have to give the government confidence that there is enough groundswell and support out there to get this referendum, this Republic referendum over the line. So tell your friends, get your family, and do it in exactly the way which Tiernan has so brilliantly and articulately encouraged us to do. So thank you very much, Tiernan. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight, and Alita for managing this brilliantly.
Thanks so much,
pleasure.
Tiernan.
Total pleasure.
Thank you.